how that flows, but I'd be glad to find out.
Okay. Second question was, during the hearing yesterday that you talked about, Ninth Circuit, there was some discussion about whether there needed to be a tweak to the executive order that to make it clear that legal permanent residents would not be included in that, and there was some back and forth on that. Will there be a tweak? Will there be a?
Well, I think there was further guidance that I spoke about that went out. I think it's been a week ago. Correct me if I'm wrong, but and talked about we wanted to make it very, very clear that legal permanent residents were not included in that. But again, remember, we're not talking about the merits of the order right now. This discussion that happened last night and that the court will be ruling on is specific to the temporary restraining order and whether or not it should be maintained until there's a further discussion on the merits. So, again, I don't want to get into the legal nuances, but right now the guidance is very clear that was issued several days ago, if not a week ago, that this is not about legal permanent residents. So that they are excluded from this, and I don't know why there would be that discussion. That clarification has been made. Jeff?
Sean, you said you're not talking about the merits of the order. Was the president this morning talking about the merits of the order when he called it disgraceful, the hearing that he heard last night?
He wasn't arguing before the Ninth Circuit, Jeff. The last night was a motion before the Ninth Circuit on the temporary restraining order. I think the president was very clear that U.S. Code and the Constitution clearly give the president all the authority that's needed to make sure that he can regulate who comes into this country and prevent any acts of, anyone who's not coming to this country in a peaceful manner. The code, 8 U.S. Code 1152, is very, very clear on this. And so I think the president was pointing out the same issue that we had in Boston, which is once we had a chance to argue it on the merits, we won on it. And so I think that's what he clearly did not argue in front of the Ninth Circuit last night. So
they called it disgraceful.
But
calling it disgraceful, is that the type of language?
I think the president, when you look at the U.S. Code and how clear it's written and the authority and power it gives the president to do what is necessary to keep this country safe and regulate who comes into this country, I think it's a very, very clear reading. And the president was very, I think he further went on and said it doesn't matter what level of education you're at. I don't think you could misread this. So I think I think he was very clear, Jeff. So thank you. Daniel Halper.
I was curious about this tweet that President Trump about his daughter's brand.
Yeah.
And then it was retweeted by the POTUS account. What's the standard that the president's doing in regards to his family businesses or that businesses?
Well, I think this was less about his family's business and an attack on his daughter. He ran for president. He won. He's leading this country. And I think for people to take out their concern about his actions or his executive orders on members of his family, he has every right to stand up for his family and applaud their business activities, their success. So, look, when it comes to his family, I think he's been very clear how proud he is of what they do and what they've accomplished. And for someone to take out their concern with his policies on a family member of his is not acceptable, and the president has every right as a father to stand up for them. I'm going to go to Norma Garcia from KXTX.
Thank you. In Texas, there is a big push to penalize sanctuary cities. In this state and other states around the country, there is a growing concern among undocumented immigrants whose lives are deeply rooted in the United States and who have no criminal records. My question is this administration ready to tackle comprehensive immigration reform? If so, can you give us a timeline for it? If not, what is the plan to deal with undocumented immigrants who live in this country long term?
Thanks, Norma. I think, this has come up several times. I don't think that anybody doubts the president's concern or priority that is placed on immigration. He's talked about it on, when you talk about a comprehensive approach, he's talked about building a wall. He's talked about making sure we go after criminals in this country. He's talked about walking through the process and addressing DACA and DAPA in time. I think this is a big problem. There's no question that both on the security side and on reforming the current immigration system that is so clearly broken, that he is walking through this already, both in terms of executive action, and then we'll continue to work through Congress. So to your question about the timeline, I think he's already enacting several pieces of it, and he's going to work with Congress to get further down that. Eamon Javers.
Sean.
Hallie, both the same family.
Two for you, Sean, here. Playing off of the question at the back from Daniel there on the business activities that you described the president taking offense to. Nordstrom has come out and says this was not a political decision, it was a business decision. Right. Ivanka Trump, as you know, has said she has divorced herself, separated herself from her business. So how is she being treated unfairly if she's not a part
I think there's clearly a targeting of her brand, and it's her name still out there. Well, so she's not directly running the company; it's still her name on it, and there's clearly efforts that to undermine that name based on her father's positions on particular policies that he's taken. This is a direct attack on his policies and her name and so that there's clearly an attempt for him to stand up for her because she is being maligned because they have a problem with his policies. John, Robert.
Sean, and actually to clarify that, the timing of that tweet, it looked like it was right after his president, PDB, during, can just...
I've heard the conjecture. He was free when that happened. Thank you.
Second question was on the
that was actually, that's two.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was a clarification of the one. The president tweeted today that if he does not prevail in court, talking about the lawsuit issue, that we will never be safe. We will never have safety and security we're entitled to. What does that mean? Does that mean that this is the only tool in his toolbox, and if this EO gets batted down by the courts, we're toast?
No, but I think that when you I mean again, let's 8 U.S. Code 1182 says whenever the president finds that the entry of an alien or any class of aliens into the United States would be detrimental to the interests of the United States, he may by proclamation and for such periods as he shall deem necessary suspend the entry of aliens or any class of aliens or immigrants or non-immigrants or impose on the entry of aliens or restrictions he may deem necessary and appropriate. I guess at some point, if you don't look at that statute and say that the president has the power that Congress and the president have deemed necessary to keep this country safe, you've got to wonder how far you're going to allow that to get eroded. So the point is that at some area, you've got to wonder if the president isn't able to execute on the power that's been vested into him and is codified in U.S. Code, at some point you have to wonder what else is at question. But we have a president that acted 100% lawfully to keep people out of this country from 7 countries that we did not have the proper information to ensure they were coming into this country with the appropriate means and motives. If at some point the president doesn't have the power, as given to him in law, to protect this country, I think that really questions what a slippery slope we're on. John.
Sean,
of course.
The president said this morning that he paid very close attention to the arguments before the last night.
Yeah.
Was he happy with the presentation that the DOJ attorney August Flenche made? There was some concern by supporters of this extreme vetting program that he wasn't strong enough. He seemed to be searching for answers, particularly at the point of standing.
I think there was a lot of back and forth during that entire argument. He made some solid points, and I think that he did what he had to represent the president's case and to represent the administration's case on the TRO. I think the president has really focused on the merits of this case and looking forward to getting it back either to the Ninth Circuit or to the lower court or however it has to move. He feels very confident on the merits, and that's where I think his focus has been. So I'm not concerned. I think the president's main concern has been on the merits of this case and making sure that an executive order that was lawfully executed and went through the entire process. Remember, we've got to go back and remember that the DOJ's Office of Legal Compliance vetted this order, deemed it was legal. So we've followed the entire process to make sure that this was done correctly, constitutionally, legally, and every otherwise. And so to now our focus is making sure that whether or not we have to wait a day or two or whatever for the TRO, we look forward to the opportunity to discuss this on the merits. Jen, Jacob.
Hey, whoa.
Sorry.
Come on. And just as a point of clarification, second question.
Now you're going
So he was happy with his presentation.
I think he is looking forward to the merits of this discussion. And I think he was pleased with some of the points that got made. But his focus is on the merits of the order and making sure that ultimately we're able to do what we can to get this order back in place and protect the American people. Jen.
The Muslim Brotherhood.
Question 2.
Look at what Hallie started.
We have reported that Russia has sent its biggest shipment of missiles ever to Syria. Just wondering what the White House's reaction is.
I think we'll have to. We don't have any comment on this time.
Okay, the
Jen.
Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah.
Is it accurate that the administration is weighing labeling the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization, and will you do the same for Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard?
I think there's no one that can question the president's commitment to to fully attacking and addressing the threat that we face by radical Islamic terrorism. He has been made very clear during the campaign that the first step is understanding, knowing, and proclaiming who the enemy is, and he's going to do whatever it takes. That being said, I'm not going to get ahead of any announcements that we may or may not have coming in the near future, but make no mistake, the president understands the threat that our nation faces, and he's going to do everything he can to attack it, root it out, and destroy it. Cecilia.
Thank you. The president also said today that in the last 2 weeks, he's learned a lot, and that terrorism is far greater, and that terrorism is a far greater threat than people understand. That sounds like he is telling the American public that they have something to fear. Is there a specific threat that he is talking about? And should the American public, based on that statement right there, be fearful?
No, but I think the American people should understand that the president's committed to doing this. We face a very, very real threat in ISIS and radical Islamic terrorism, and that we've got to do everything he can, and that the reason that he is taking the steps that he is because we must remain ever vigilant. We can't let our guard down. We have to be ahead of the curve, and that the president is going to take the steps necessary to protect this country and its people. And that the idea that we should sit back and not fully appreciate the constant threat that we're in, it's week after week, month after month, that we're hearing of another instance, lone wolf, et cetera, that is going throughout this country. Throughout the world. My apologies. And so I think what the president's doing is trying to make sure that the American people understand that he's doing everything he can to protect them and to keep our institutions and our people safe. And so this is not something that we can rest on our laurels, that we can't understand. He was just down at CENTCOM and SOCOM on Monday morning getting a full briefing of the threat that we face from around the world and their motives. And I think that that's something that he weighs very heavily on his mind when he meets with these people, gets these briefings, meets with the Green Beret soldiers, that he recognizes that there are so many people out there putting their life on the line to protect this country and to make sure that we understand the threats, and that it is his job and his obligation to do everything within his power to take that information and do what he can to protect the country. And so just to put a pin in it, I just want to be clear. While we may not face an imminent threat today, we don't know when that next threat comes. Is it next week? Is it next month? Is it next year? But the president wants to get ahead of the curve and make sure that we're not talking about what we should have done, but taking every step necessary to make sure that it doesn't happen. Steve.
But is the threat today greater than it was yesterday or last week? Because that's what he's saying.
I understand what he's saying. What I'm telling you is that we shouldn't ever be behind the curve on the threats that this country faces. We should make sure we don't know when the next one's coming. We don't know when the next lone wolf is coming. We don't know when the next attack is. We've got amazing intelligence that's trying to root out and make sure that it doesn't happen again. But what we can't do is wait for the next attack to come and say, I wish we had done the following. And the steps that he's taken are proactively making this country and our people safer. Steve.
Sean, what was the White House response to the Republican proposal for a carbon tax floated today? And separately, could you just set up tomorrow's meeting with the airline CEOs a little bit? What do you hope to get out of it? What do you hope to discuss?
So I'm not going to comment on pending legislation. We'll wait to see where that comes. That's just not going to be a habit of ours to comment on every bill that gets introduced or marked up in committee until we have a statement of administration policy. And with respect to the meeting tomorrow, we'll have a further readout on that later tomorrow. But I will say, in general, as you know, he's met with Intel just now. He met with oil executives from the car manufacturers, manufacturing companies, technological companies, unions. So these continued meetings that you'll see in the next months and years are going to be an attempt to make sure that he's sitting down with business leaders from around the country to figure out how he can use his office and this administration to further their ability to create jobs and grow the economy. So this is going to be more of a pattern. You're going to continue to see him meeting with people who want to share that agenda to grow, create jobs, manufacture here, lift wages up here, bring benefits to good-paying jobs, etc.
Should we take any significance from the fact that you did have this meeting about the carbon tax?
No, look, we're not at a policy. We have nothing to announce on that. If I can go now to our next seat. We've got Josh Smith from WJHL in Southwest Virginia.
First off, thanks so much for taking questions from journalists covering local news. We appreciate it. WJHL is in Northeast Tennessee and Southwest Virginia. That is coal country, and I have 2 questions related to coal. Then candidate Trump came to Abingdon, Virginia last year, and he made a bold promise. It would help to rescue the mining industry, that he would help to bring back coal jobs, and he would push back against environmental regulations. If the executive order last week was a first step, what specifically is the president willing to do, planning to do, to make good on that promise, to help the coal industry, to encourage coal production and use, and to deal with what some call its demonized image? And as a follow-up, and I got to ask 2 questions because